I should have left the Airbnb the moment I noticed the bedroom door could only be locked from the outside. At first I assumed it was just an old door with a weird lock. But around 2:30 in the morning, someone tried to use it. Airbnb can be a great alternative to hotels. Most of the time the experience is completely normal. You check in, stay for a night or two, then leave without thinking about it again. But sometimes, the place you're staying has something strange about it. And sometimes the people connected to it are even stranger. These are 3 Airbnb stays that turned into complete nightmares. This happened about 2 years ago when I took a short weekend trip to Portland. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a quick break from work. I originally planned to stay in a hotel, but prices were ridiculous that weekend. Every decent place was over $200 a night, so I started looking through Airbnb instead. After about 20 minutes of searching, I found a small apartment listing that looked perfect. The photos showed a clean, simple studio apartment. Nothing fancy, just a small living room, a kitchen area, and a bedroom. The reviews were good too. Over 100 ratings, mostly 5 stars. People described the host as friendly and responsive. That was enough to convince me. So I booked 2 nights. The host sent me a message later that day with instructions for check-in. He said the key would be inside a small lockbox next to the front entrance of the building. Pretty standard Airbnb setup, nothing unusual. I arrived around 8 p.m. that evening. The building itself looked older than I expected. It was a narrow 3-story structure squeezed between 2 other buildings. The outside paint was slightly faded, and the windows looked like they hadn't been replaced in decades. But the neighborhood seemed quiet. There were streetlights, cars parked nearby. Nothing about it made me feel unsafe. At least not yet. I found the lockbox easily, entered the code the host sent me, and grabbed the key. When I stepped inside the building, the first thing I noticed was the hallway. It was extremely quiet. The floorboards were old and wooden. Every step made a long creaking sound. The lighting was dim too. Just a few yellow bulbs spaced along the ceiling. The apartment I rented was on the 3rd floor, so I climbed the stairs slowly, listening to each step echo in the hallway. When I finally reached the door, I unlocked it and stepped inside. The apartment itself looked exactly like the photos. Small living room, basic couch, coffee table, tiny kitchen area. Nothing fancy, but clean. It felt normal. The kind of place you'd stay for a night or two, and then forget about. I dropped my bag near the couch and walked around for a minute just looking at everything. That's when I noticed something slightly strange. The bedroom door had an old metal sliding lock attached to it, but the placement of the lock didn't make sense. It wasn't positioned for someone inside the room to use. It looked like it had been installed on the outside of the door, which meant someone could lock the bedroom from the hallway. I stared at it for a moment, trying to understand why it was built that way. But eventually I shrugged it off. Old buildings sometimes had weird design choices, and honestly, I didn't think much about it after that. Later that night I ordered some takeout and watched Netflix for a few hours. Everything felt normal. The apartment was quiet, comfortable, and the Wi-Fi worked perfectly. Around midnight I finally went to bed. The bedroom itself was small, just a bed, a nightstand, and a window facing the street. I remember scrolling through my phone for a few minutes before falling asleep. At some point during the night I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. The room was dark and completely silent. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Very slow footsteps coming from the hallway outside the apartment. The floorboards creaked with every step. It sounded like someone walking back and forth. At first I assumed it was just another person who lived in the building, maybe coming home late. But the footsteps didn't pass by the apartment. They stopped, right outside the door. I held my breath and listened. For several seconds nothing happened. Then I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. The sound of a key sliding into the lock. My heart started racing instantly. Someone was trying to unlock the door. I sat up in bed completely frozen. The key turned slightly, then stopped. Whoever was outside seemed to struggle with it for a moment, like they expected the door to open but it wouldn't. Then suddenly the key slid back out, and the footsteps walked away down the hallway. I waited for almost a full minute before getting out of bed. Slowly, quietly, I walked into the living room and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No one there, no sound, nothing. For a moment I tried convincing myself it was a simple mistake. Maybe another tenant had accidentally tried the wrong apartment. It happens sometimes. Still, something about it didn't sit right with me. So I messaged the Airbnb host. I asked if anyone else had access to the apartment key. No response. Not that night. I didn't sleep well after that. Every little sound in the building made me tense up. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember was waking up to another noise. This time it was coming from inside the apartment. A faint scraping sound, very slow, very deliberate. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I heard it again. The sliding metal lock on the bedroom door, moving. But the lock was on the outside, which meant someone was in the hallway, touching it. I jumped out of bed immediately and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty, but I heard something else. Fast footsteps, running down the stairs. That was enough for me. I didn't wait around to investigate. I grabbed my bag, threw my things inside, and left the apartment. Within minutes, I was outside standing next to my car. The building was completely silent again. No lights turning on. No one looking out windows. Just darkness. I ended up driving to a nearby gas station and staying there until morning. I didn't go back. The next day, I contacted Airbnb and explained everything. They refunded my stay almost immediately. When I checked the listing again a few days later, it was gone. Completely removed. And I never heard from the host again. But sometimes I still think about that bedroom door, and why someone installed a lock that could only be used from the outside. That apartment listing disappeared a week later, and to this day I still don't know why someone tried to lock that bedroom door from the outside. But as unsettling as that experience was, the next Airbnb story might be even worse, because the people staying there eventually realized something disturbing. They weren't just being watched outside the house. Someone might have been watching them from inside it. My friend only noticed the camera because the small red light blinked when the room went dark. At first we thought it was just part of the smoke detector, but when he climbed onto the chair to look closer, he immediately climbed back down. And the first thing he said was, "Guys, I think someone's watching us." This happened last summer during a road trip through Arizona. 3 friends and I decided to take a week-long trip driving through different desert towns. We didn't want to stay in hotels the whole time, so we booked a few Airbnbs along the route. Most of them were completely normal. Small houses, quiet areas, nothing unusual. But one of them turned out to be a lot different. The place was located about 20 minutes outside a town called Prescott. According to the listing, it was a small desert house with a great view of the mountains. The photos looked amazing. Large windows, rustic furniture, and a big living room area. It had over 200 reviews, almost all 5 stars, so none of us had any reason to think something might be wrong. When we arrived, the sun was already starting to set. The house sat by itself near a dirt road. There weren't any other homes nearby, just open desert and scattered trees. It looked peaceful, quiet, exactly what we expected. The host had messaged us earlier that day with instructions. He said the key would be hidden under a flat rock next to the porch. When we found it, we unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled slightly dusty, but otherwise it looked clean. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but after a few minutes, we started noticing something strange. There were decorations everywhere, shelves filled with random objects, vintage radios, old cameras, little statues, books stacked in strange places. Almost like someone had intentionally filled every empty space in the house. It wasn't creepy exactly, just unusual. After unpacking, we decided to relax in the living room for a while. We ordered pizza from a place in town and started watching a movie. About an hour passed without anything strange happening. Then my friend Josh noticed something on the ceiling. There was a smoke detector directly above the couch, but it looked slightly different from a normal one. For one thing, it wasn't blinking like most smoke detectors do. Instead, it had a tiny dark circle in the center. Josh pointed at it and joked, "That thing looks like a camera." We all laughed, because honestly, it did look strange, but none of us seriously believed it was actually a camera, at least not at first. Josh grabbed one of the dining chairs and stood on it. He leaned closer to the smoke detector. Then he got very quiet. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. He just stared at it. Then he slowly climbed back down. The look on his face had completely changed, and that's when he said something that made the entire room go silent. "Guys, there's a lens inside it." At first we thought he was joking, but he grabbed his phone and used the flashlight to shine directly at the smoke detector. And sure enough, inside the small dark circle was a tiny glass lens, perfectly centered, exactly like a camera. For a moment, none of us said anything. The room suddenly felt different, like the entire house had changed. Then someone asked the obvious question, "Is that even legal?" Josh didn't answer. Instead, he looked around the room slowly, like he was searching for something. Then he pointed toward the hallway. "Wait, there's another one." We walked over and looked up. Another smoke detector, and it looked identical. Same small dark circle in the center, same angle pointing directly toward the hallway. Josh grabbed the chair again and climbed up. A few seconds later, he confirmed it. Another lens. That's when the situation stopped feeling like a weird coincidence and started feeling like something much worse. We decided to check the rest of the house. The first bedroom had another smoke detector mounted above the bed, and it looked exactly the same. Same dark lens, same angle, pointed directly at where someone would sleep. At that point, nobody felt comfortable staying there anymore. We started packing our things immediately, but something about the situation felt unsettling. Because if those were cameras, someone could be watching us right now, in real time. The thought alone made the house feel incredibly uncomfortable, like every movement we made was being observed. Josh unplugged the router before we left, just in case the cameras were connected to the internet. Then we grabbed our bags and headed for the door. Before leaving, one of my friends sent the host a message through Airbnb. He asked a simple question: "Why are there cameras inside the smoke detectors?" We waited a few minutes. No response. We got in the car and started driving toward town. About 10 minutes later, Josh checked the Airbnb app again. Still no reply, but something else caught his attention. The host had suddenly gone offline, which meant he had probably seen the message, but chose not to respond. That made the whole situation feel even worse, because if those cameras were real, there was a chance the host had been watching us the entire time. From the moment we walked into the house. 2 days later, we checked the listing again. It had completely disappeared. No house, no host profile, nothing. Just gone. And we never found out how long those cameras had actually been there, or how many people had stayed in that house before we did. The house disappeared from Airbnb 2 days later. The listing was completely gone. No explanation, no response from the host, and no way to know how long those cameras had actually been there. But as disturbing as hidden cameras can be, at least those guests were able to leave before anything worse happened. Because in the next Airbnb story, the guest realized something far more terrifying. Someone else might have already been inside the house. The Airbnb listing said the cabin had been empty all week. No other guests, no shared spaces, just a quiet place in the woods. But about 10 minutes after I walked inside, I heard footsteps upstairs, and I realized something. Someone was already there. This happened last year when I traveled to Tennessee for a small music festival. The festival itself was held outside the city, surrounded by a lot of farmland and forest. Hotels in the area filled up quickly, so I started looking for places to stay nearby. Eventually, I found a small cabin listed on Airbnb. It was about 15 minutes from the festival grounds. The listing described it as a quiet woodland retreat, perfect for solo travelers who wanted privacy. The photos showed a simple wooden cabin, front porch, 2 chairs, tall trees surrounding the property. It looked peaceful, exactly the kind of place you'd stay for a relaxing weekend. The reviews were decent too, nothing suspicious, so I booked 2 nights. The host messaged me later that day with instructions. He said the key would be inside a small lockbox next to the front door. Pretty normal check-in process. When I arrived that evening, the sun was already starting to set. The road leading to the cabin was narrow, just gravel and dirt. There weren't many houses nearby, mostly trees. The deeper I drove, the quieter everything became. Eventually, I reached the cabin, and it looked exactly like the photos. Small wooden building, front porch, 2 chairs, no other houses in sight, just woods. I grabbed the key from the lockbox and unlocked the door. The first thing I noticed when stepping inside was the temperature. The air felt warm. Not just warm from the weather, more like someone had recently been inside. I figured maybe the host had stopped by earlier to clean, so I didn't think much about it. The inside of the cabin was small but comfortable. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, and a staircase leading upstairs. According to the listing, the bedroom was upstairs. I dropped my bag near the couch and looked around. Everything seemed normal. Nothing out of place. I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and sat down for a minute. That's when I heard it. A soft thump. From upstairs. At first, I thought maybe it was just the house settling. Old cabins sometimes make strange noises, especially in wooded areas. So I ignored it. But about 30 seconds later, I heard something else. A slow, creaking sound, like someone stepping across wooden floorboards. Above me. I froze. The listing clearly said the cabin was entirely private. No other guests. No shared spaces. Just me. So there shouldn't have been anyone upstairs. I sat there quietly listening. Then the footsteps came again. One step, then another, moving slowly across the floor. That's when my stomach started to drop. I stood up slowly and looked toward the staircase. The lights upstairs were off. The hallway above was completely dark. For a moment I considered calling out. Maybe the host was there. Maybe someone had accidentally entered the wrong cabin. But something about the situation didn't feel right. Instead, I stayed quiet, listening. Then I heard a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged lightly across the floor, followed by another step, and another. Whoever was upstairs was definitely moving around, and they weren't trying to be quiet. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but my car keys were sitting on the kitchen counter, on the other side of the room, which meant I'd have to walk across the cabin, directly beneath whoever was upstairs. I moved slowly toward the counter, trying not to make any noise. The floor creaked under my feet, and the footsteps upstairs suddenly stopped. Everything went completely silent. For about 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard something that made my chest tighten, the sound of someone walking toward the top of the staircase. I grabbed my keys, turned toward the door, and walked out as calmly as I could. But right before I reached the door, I heard the staircase creak behind me. The first step. Someone had started coming down. I didn't look back. I opened the door and stepped outside as quickly as possible. Once I reached my car, I finally turned around. And that's when I saw something that still creeps me out. A figure standing at the upstairs window, completely still, just watching me. I couldn't see their face. Only the outline of someone standing there in the dark, looking directly down at the driveway. I got into my car and drove away immediately. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station about 20 minutes away. Once I calmed down, I messaged the Airbnb host asking if someone else was staying at the cabin. He replied about an hour later. His message was short, just 1 sentence. He said, "There shouldn't have been anyone there." I never went back to that cabin. Airbnb refunded the stay the next day. But the strangest part came later. About a week after the trip, I checked the listing again. The cabin was still there, still accepting bookings, and still described as a private place with no other guests. Which means whoever was inside that night probably wasn't supposed to be there, and might still be there sometimes, waiting for the next person who books the cabin. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this, and if you've ever had a strange Airbnb experience yourself, I'd be interested to hear it.